In this video, you'll learn how healthy nuts are, how nuts may help you achieve your essential fatty acid needs, and hear why some may suggest certain people limit eating nuts. We're also going to highlight how misleading Jeff Nelson has been on this topic to further his unscrupulous attacks on Dr. Fuhrman. Jeff Nelson has made it clear that he is not a doctor, he is not a scientist either, and his recent videos have been extremely misleading and dangerous. If you subscribe to VegSource, I urge you to unsubscribe now. If you would like to take further action, please report his channel immediately. I have provided a link in the description of this video along with further details as well as other videos showing how misleading and wrong Nelson is.
Today I'm talking about nuts and Dr. Joel Fuhrman, and we're both on the same side when it comes to promoting a plant-based diet. In his reaction to my nut video, Dr. Fuhrman speculated on my motives in making this video series.
Let's think about what his motivation is, right? Why is he? Obviously he's doing this because the evidence and the studies are showing otherwise than his favorite nutritional gurus are, than the people he's representing, right, have said to do. It's making the research is making them look bad.
According to Dr. Fuhrman, I am protecting someone's legacy. I actually have no idea who he's talking about here. Dr. Ornish, by the way, does allow a tiny amount of nuts, 3 grams or less. For example, he says 2 cashews or 1 walnut.
Let's keep in mind that Dr. Dean Ornish and Esselstyn are working with patients that have severe cardiometabolic diseases. They're not asymptomatic, otherwise healthy people that could benefit from eating a whole serving of walnuts, for example. So let's look at walnuts, perhaps one of the healthiest nuts. Ornish is recommending 1, but there's 7 in a serving, and a serving has 2.5 grams of ALA, which is a good thing. We know conversion is kind of low. 8 to 20% of ALA gets converted to EPA, and only about 0.5 to 9% of ALA is converted to DHA. And that works out to be about 500 milligrams of EPA and 225 milligrams of DHA. So that's about a serving of your essential fatty acids if you eat a full serving of walnuts. Maybe that's why Dr. Fuhrman would prefer people in general eat a full serving of walnuts instead of just 1.
And Dr. Esselstyn, of course, has always allowed seeds. Both of these doctors allow nuts and seeds on their regular diets.
You say they allow it, yet you showed where it says my preference is no nuts for heart disease patients. So clearly they are discouraging nuts for their patients. And I think this may be where people are getting confused because possibly they're only hearing my preference is no nuts.
Dr. Fuhrman continues, the facts are extreme low-fat dieters are at higher risk of depression and dementia, as well as premature mortality from all causes, and the evidence increases every year. I have seen no good scientific evidence that vegans consuming a low-fat diet are at higher risk of depression, dementia, or premature mortality because of their healthy dietary choices.
Why does it matter what you've seen when you're not a scientist, a researcher? You're at best an armchair researcher, but you're nothing like a physician in a clinical setting that's been working with patients for 30 years and actually seeing what they're dealing with.
He's not practiced medicine for 30 years and helped thousands to recover their health.
I've always made it clear that I'm a journalist, not a doctor. But there's plenty of evidence that low-fat vegan dieters do live longer and healthier and better than most people.
So let's look at what constitutes a low-fat vegan diet. The main sources of fat would be nuts and seeds, because beans, greens, grains, fruits, veggies, and mushrooms have virtually no fat. And guess what? You can eat an entire serving of walnuts, an entire serving of flaxseed, and an entire serving of sunflower seeds, and still be well within the range of a low-fat vegan diet. Sure, low-fat vegan diets might help people live healthier and longer, but that doesn't mean that they still can't have complications from having an insufficient low-nutrient diet.
Dr. Fuhrman's central theme in his article seems to be that number 1, that a high-nut diet extends your life, and that number 2, the low-fat diets of Dr. Esselstyn, Ornish, and maybe he's talking about Pritikin and the other low-fat doctors, that their diets will apparently kill you early, they'll give you dementia.
Wait a minute, you've already said that you
actually have no idea who he's talking about here.
But then you list these doctors as if he's throwing them under the bus, and you accuse him of saying that these doctors will kill you and wreck your brain? Why would you make this up when you clearly
actually have no idea who he's talking about here? His message seems to be that he, Dr. Furman, is the one doctor who has the true healthy diet, and you should be very frightened if you're not following his diet.
He is the one doctor who has the true healthy diet, and you should be frightened if you don't follow his diet plan, but you never showed us where he's saying that. So now when I look at you, I'm like,
Actually have no idea who he's talking about here.
and if we're talking about the general population, maybe they should be following Dr. Furman if he's suggesting they eat a whole serving of nuts and not just one nut, because the general population needs to know how to eat healthfully, not eat like they're on some sort of treatment program for end-stage heart disease.
Dr. Greger gives thanks to the diet which gave him more time with his grandmother, the same diet that Dr. Furman claims kills people prematurely.
You need to show us where Dr. Furman is saying the Pritikin diet is killing people prematurely. Otherwise, you're just making this up.
Dr. Bernard has also done a huge amount of very significant dietary research.
So you want to talk about Neil Bernard? Let's start with PCRM. And they talk about the links between nuts and lower risk of heart disease, strokes, and diabetes and cancer, lower cholesterol, longer lifespans. That sounds like something Dr. Furman would say. Getting your omega-3 fatty acids from nuts, which we know is a good thing. Vitamin E, we know is a good thing. It prevents arterial blockage, thrombosis maybe. How nuts prevent arterial fibrillation. Yeah, a lot of good stuff there from nuts and seeds. And let's go specifically to Neil Bernard. What's up, Neil? And down here we see the good news is that not all fats are bad fats. A handful of nuts and seeds, which pair well as a salad topping, can provide cognitive benefits. That's another thing that Dr. Furman says, thanks to a healthful dose of vitamin E.
And of course, the Pritikin program has been going on longer than any of them and has amassed a very significant amount of tight research.
So let's look at what the Pritikin program says. If your weight is fine, celebrate. Limit walnuts, flax seeds, almonds, and so on to 1 ounce per day, and 1 ounce of walnuts is like 7. A handful, just like Dr. Neil Bernard said. It's not just one because the general population is not a patient under Ornish's program or Esselstyn's.
What's surprising is that Dr. Furman is telling his followers that these studies show that nut eating extends life. He claims these studies show that a lack of sufficient nuts and seeds increases premature death. But that's not true. These studies don't say any such thing like that. Nowhere in these studies could Dr. Furman read lines that say nuts extend lifespan or lack of nuts increases premature death.
So we've already seen on PCRM's website where they suggest there may be a link between nuts and longer lifespan. If you go to Harvard's website here, Harvard Health Publishing, they have an article on eating nuts linked to healthier, longer life. And Google and do a search for NIH nuts. You can find a whole bunch of scientific articles on the benefits of nuts. In conclusion, frequent nut consumption could play a role in reducing the risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease through improvement in glucose and lipid metabolism, weight maintenance, and improved endothelial function. And it might extend your life a little and health span. And we got another one here. Nuts are a nutrient-rich food with wide-ranging cardiovascular and metabolic benefits. And we got another here. Nuts are a nutrient-rich food group. Depending on the type, they may provide substantive concentrations of vitamin E, which is good for cognitive health, magnesium, folate, essential fatty acids, which is good for your brain as well, fiber, and protein to the diet. Good stuff. A greater consumption of tree nuts and peanuts is associated with a reduced risk of cardiovascular mortality, as well as lower cardiovascular disease. Furthermore, risk factors associated with the development of cardiovascular disease, such as dyslipidemia, impaired vascular function, and hypertension, are improved with regular tree nut and peanut consumption through a range of mechanisms associated with their nutrient-rich profiles. Death attributed to cardiovascular disease and coronary heart disease showed strong and consistent reductions with increased nut peanut butter consumption. Regular consumption, approximately one handful, not just one nut, but a handful of nuts over a long term as a replacement to less healthful foods, can be incorporated as a component of a healthy diet for the prevention of obesity and type 2 diabetes. Randomized clinical trial of high cardiovascular risk provided first-class evidence that regular nut consumption is associated with a 50% reduction in incident diabetes and, more importantly, a 30% reduction in cardiovascular disease. All right, so nut intake demonstrates benefit on health outcomes, preventing and or treating some chronic diseases related to risk factors such as changes in glycemic and lipid metabolism, oxidative stress, and inflammation. All good things for a nice long health span. Here we go. Indeed, there are consistent evidences from epidemiological and clinical studies of the beneficial effects of nut consumption on risk of coronary heart disease, including sudden cardiac death, as well as on diabetes in women and a major and emerging cardiovascular risk factors, as summarized in this table, and the 2 stars, consisting evidence in several studies. Coronary heart disease has 2 stars, so it's got the highest level of evidence in their analysis. Here's another one. Higher nut intake is associated with reduced risk of cardiovascular disease, total cancer, and all-cause mortality, and mortality from respiratory disease, diabetes, and infections. Further evidence that nut consumption is good for health and may prevent premature deaths. There's a lot of stuff that's indicating there's a chance it might increase your lifespan. Measured as cases of cardiovascular disease potentially averted and Daly's disability adjusted life year saved outweighed any additional cases of liver cancer due to increased nut consumption. So let's not forget, a lot of people like to roast nuts or eat roasted nuts and salt and all that, which is not a healthy way to eat nuts, of course. The acrylamide and all could contribute to cancer. I'm not saying that's what it is, but you never know. You want to eat your nuts raw, unsalted. Improving the knowledge of health benefits of nuts among health professionals is likely to improve the advice given to patients. This is important given the current low levels of nut consumption, despite the large body of literature reporting the health benefits of regular nut consumption. In addition to being rich in several vitamins and minerals, unsaturated fatty acids, and fiber, tree nuts and peanuts contain numerous phytochemicals that may contribute to promoting health and reducing the risk of chronic disease. Based on the available evidence from prospective studies, also supported by randomized controlled trials and cross-sectional studies, long-term nut consumption is associated with lower weight gain and overweight obesity. Higher consumption of total nuts and walnuts in particular is associated with a significantly lower risk of type 2 diabetes in women, and much of the inverse association with type 2 diabetes appears to be mediated through body weight. Nuts may be included in the diet in moderation to enhance palatability, nutrient quality, and chronic disease risk reduction without compromising weight loss or maintenance. So it sounds like it's a good part of a healthy diet. Based on the studies included in this review, there is some evidence for an improvement in vascular stiffness, with 5 of 13 chronic studies reporting significant reductions following nut consumption. And pretty much every study is going to suggest further research needs to be done because it's just the nature of science. You mentioned this being a good source. However, increasing plant-based ALA may be slightly protective for some heart and circulatory diseases. This is what you said, a good source. The dietary changes assessed in the study, displacing a portion of saturated fat in a typical American diet and enhancing phytochemical intake with a handful of whole pecans daily, can protect adults at risk for developing cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes due to their age, overweight status, and body fat distribution. And we know that CDD is a leading cause of death. So there again, increasing the lifespan. Improvements in linoleic acid and pyridoxal phosphate were observed with chronic consumption. We know that's a good thing. Data suggests that pistachios have a glucose and insulin-lowering effect, promote a healthier metabolic profile, and reverse certain metabolic deleterious consequences of prediabetes. Pooled analyses show that tree nuts improve glycemic control in individuals with type 2 diabetes, supporting their inclusion in a healthy diet. Total nut consumption lowered systolic blood pressure in participants without type 2 diabetes. Pistachios seem to have the strongest effect on reducing blood pressure, and mixed nuts also. And that's just the first 2 pages. All of the studies showed something extremely positive that could definitely lead to a longer, healthier life.
The studies Dr. Fuhrman is pointing to in order to try to discredit Dr. Ornish or Dr. Esselstyn.
Wait a minute, I thought you
actually have no idea who he's talking about here.
Yet here you go again, accusing Dr. Fuhrman of something that you totally made up.
Dr. Bernard at PCRM, he sued the 2015 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee after they declared that cholesterol was safe and that eggs were healthy, and they changed the dietary guidelines to reflect that finding. And according to Dr. Bernard's lawsuit, he sued because 90% of the research relied on by the Dietary Committee about eggs were studies that were paid for by the egg industry.
That might be what Neil Bernard and PCRM says about eggs, but when they talk about nuts, they think there's a link between nuts and longer lifespan, and they even cite some sources like these findings suggest that nut consumption may play a role in reduced risk of arterial fibrillation and possibly heart failure.
Dr. Fuhrman looked at the question, do vegans need supplements?
It says right there, vegan athletes. We all know that athletes have different nutrient requirements than just a regular person. Let's keep it in context of what's really being said.
And in his study, Dr. Fuhrman concluded that yes, they definitely do. They need a bunch of them.
Why don't you show us where he comes to that conclusion in the study instead of your face? Let's at least rewind it and check out what you did show us before you said that. Vegetarian diets are associated with several health benefits, but whether a vegetarian or vegan diet is beneficial for athletic performance has not been defined. Then it goes on to say that they're going to discuss prevention of potential micronutrient deficiencies that may occur in the vegan athlete, and provide strategies on meeting the enhanced caloric and protein needs of an athlete with a plant-based diet. This all sounds very reasonable, and by no means sounds like he's suggesting even remotely that they absolutely need a bunch of supplements, like you just accused him of saying.
Fortunately, Dr. Fuhrman's main business happens to be selling these supplements, so the result of his study just happened to coincide with his personal financial interests.
What evidence do you have that his main business is selling supplements? And you're selling videos. Does that mean you have a conflict of interest? Because you could just be making this up to drive more traffic to your business, just like you're accusing him of doing. And we know that zinc is hard to get in a plant-based diet. So of course, some of those supplements could be very beneficial, but the videos you're selling, how beneficial are those? If you were really concerned about helping people and getting the truth out there, then shouldn't all of your videos be available for free on YouTube? It seems like you've been looking at yourself too long on YouTube and projecting, because there's definitely some overactive bullshit going on there.
The concern with the veg source videos are they could lead some people to exclude all nuts and perhaps even seeds and switch to a more low-fat vegan diet, which according to Dr. Fuhrman can put us at a higher risk of depression, anxiety, postpartum depression, dementia, and even premature mortality from all causes. Quote, "The lack of sufficient nuts or seeds in the diet increases premature death, particularly cardiovascular death, as demonstrated in every long-term study examining this issue, such as the Adventist Health Study 1 and 2, the Iowa Women's Health Study, the Nurses' Health Study, and the Physicians' Health Study." Now, an important argument raised by the VegSource team is that all the epidemiology on this issue are studies that have been funded by the nut industry and are therefore biased. In the article, Dr. Fuhrman says, "Industry funding does not invalidate studies. True industry is more likely to help fund research if they think it will turn out in their favour. However, these studies must make it through peer review and meet the standards of scientific journals. The original study from 1992 that found the first evidence of a strong protective effect of nuts against heart disease was not funded by the nut industry. Once there was some observational evidence in favour of nuts, of course the nut industry wanted to help partially support additional research that would likely yield similar results." Now, this study was funded by the National Cancer Institute and not the nut industry. It included 3 large cohorts totaling around 200,000 participants who were followed for 5 to 12 years and concluded that nut intake was associated with a lower risk of total mortality in all 3 cohorts. Dr. Fuhrman goes on to say, "When a research institution gets a grant from the nut industry to aid their research, they cannot fabricate the findings that nut-avoiding vegans were dying younger. And the results of the enormous Adventist Health Study 2 were consistent with prior studies, a 39% decreased occurrence of cardiovascular mortality in those eating nuts and seeds at least 5 times a week, compared to less than once a week. Every large-scale epidemiological trial also appears to show the same thing, that avoidance of nuts and seeds increases risk of premature death. Multiple other meta-analyses also performed dose-response analysis and reported dose-response associations between nut intake and a lower risk of all-cause mortality. So the more nuts someone ate, the less likely they were to die during the follow-up periods of the studies. So what about Jeff's point that the reason all these epidemiology studies had these findings were because those eating nuts were healthier overall for other reasons, such as they ate less meat, exercised more, ate more vegetables, and were less likely to be overweight? Well, as Dr. Fuhrman says, this was evaluated in the study, and the researchers used modern statistical methods to control and evaluate for confounding factors. Jeff also claimed that the reduction in cholesterol is small and is just due to removing meat and dairy from the diet. However, the Adventist Health Study showed that in vegetarian participants who exercised regularly, expected age at death was 7.8 years older in the group who ate nuts regularly versus those who did not. Also, pooled results of 4 large early prospective studies, the Adventist Health Study, the Iowa Women's Health Study, the Nurses' Health Study, and the Physicians' Health Study, reported a 37% reduction in heart disease risk in participants eating nuts more than 4 times per week compared to those who never or rarely ate nuts. Quote, "This reduced risk of coronary heart disease seen in epidemiologic studies is supported by studies investigating potential cardioprotective mechanisms of nuts and seeds. In addition to cholesterol reduction, these studies suggest nuts and seeds reduce oxidative stress and inflammation, promote insulin sensitivity, and improve endothelial function." When Jeff looked at the 1992 conclusions from the Adventist Health Study that reported a reduction in risk of coronary heart disease associated with nut consumption, he felt they had twisted the findings, because if we believe the results of that study, we could conclude that we should also eat cheese, beef, and bread, as they were also associated with a lower risk. However, it appears that these associations were not statistically significant. The opposite was found for legumes and fruit. So does that mean we should avoid them because they increase the risk? No, these were also non-significant results. What's interesting though is that the association with nuts was significant. The results on nuts were the ones the researchers highlighted because they were the only statistically significant finding. Now, when it comes to patients with cardiovascular disease, I think we have to be a bit more cautious with nuts. Despite Dr. Fuhrman publishing a paper in the American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine, which did document impressive cardiovascular reversal results while including nuts and seeds, I'm personally more with Dr. Greger on this one.
On paper, for cardiovascular disease, nuts are wonderful. Let's think of all the stages of atherosclerosis, hardening of arteries, heart disease. High cholesterol. Nuts lower your cholesterol. Inflammation. Nuts are anti-inflammatory. Endothelial function, the function of your arteries. Nuts improve within hours endothelial function. Nuts improve cardiovascular risk factor. So one would assume that you put people on a whole food plant-based diet with nuts, they would reverse their heart disease even better than a low-fat, a whole food plant-based diet. Has that ever been put to the test? Not in a randomized controlled trial. So, for example, Dr. Joel Fuhrman has published case reports showing that, look, I can reverse people's heart disease with a nut-rich, nuts, avocado seeds, whole food sources of fat. I can reverse heart disease just as well as the, Ornishes, Pritikin's, Esselstyn's of the world with a whole food plant-based diet with added whole food sources of fat. The problem is, these are case reports, right? These are like individual patients that did better. We have yet to have a randomized control trial where you take people to randomize different diets and actually see. I would love to see a study where they put people on a low-fat whole food plant-based diet versus a plant-based diet with some walnuts and see who did better. My educated guess, walnut group does better. That's what I would guess. But if I had heart disease, if I had a patient that had heart disease, if I had a loved one that had heart disease, you don't make them into guinea pigs. You don't mess around. We have data from these randomized control trials. You put people on a whole food plant-based diet that's low in fat, you reverse their disease. That's the data we have. And so what do? You go on that diet. You go on the diet that's proven to work. Theoretically, I think there's a diet that works even better. That same diet with walnut. You want to be the one that puts that to the test? Go for it. But that's not where the available data is. The best available balance of evidence, if it wasn't life and death, hey, let's give it a try. It's life and death, so you do what works. Hopefully in the future, we're going to get those trials. If the risk factor data translates out to actual events, to actual mortality, I think it would work even better. But am I willing to bet my life on it, or the life of my patients, or the life of people I care about? No. Should there be a study? Yes.
According to Dr. Fuhrman, he believes that it's potentially dangerous to err on the side of caution, radically excluding fat and DHA supplementation from the diet of heart disease patients. However, I would recommend checking out this short video to hear Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn's fat recommendations for those with heart disease.